had only been in the house for 3 days. The smell of fresh paint still lingered in the hallways, faint but comforting, and the morning sunlight spilled through the wide windows facing the ocean. I was unpacking a box of dishes, setting them carefully into the kitchen cabinet, when I caught myself smiling, something I hadn't done much in years. For decades, I had lived in other people's spaces, my husband's home until he passed, then my son's basement, where my world shrank to a single window and borrowed air. Now this place, this beach house, was mine. Not ours, not anyone else's, mine. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the sliding glass doors, watching the tide stretch and pull. There's an old line by Robert Frost: "Good fences make good neighbors." I thought of it that morning, not just about neighbors, but about family. Fences, boundaries, walls, they were what I had saved for, brick by brick of sacrifice. I had chosen this house because it sat a little apart from the crowded stretch of rental homes. It wasn't big, but it was steady. It was freedom. I ran my fingers across the counter, proud of the faint grooves in the granite, proof of something that belonged entirely to me. Seniors often say the American dream is less about luxury and more about security. That's what I had earned, security. Or so I thought. The phone rang, jolting me from that fragile calm. I set down my mug and glanced at the screen. Adia, my sister. I hesitated, the kind of pause that comes from long memory, then answered. "Hey," she said briskly, as though she were already mid-conversation. "Just a heads up. We'll be there in about 3 hours. I've got 22 people with me, my husband's side, some cousins, the kids. You've got plenty of space, right?" I froze. "Excuse me?" She kept talking. "We'll need the rooms ready. Make sure you've got bedding, and if you could get some food going, that'd be great. It'll be fun, a fresh start for all of us." I held the phone away from my ear, staring out at the waves. My chest tightened. 22 people, 3 hours. No question of whether it was okay. No congratulations on the house. Just an assumption. "Adia," I managed. "I just moved in. The boxes are still—" "Perfect timing, then," she interrupted. "This way everyone can break the place in together. You always did want family around, didn't you?" My mind spun. Time is money, people say, but family can drain both faster than any stranger. I thought about the groceries I had bought for myself, the single bed I had just set up with fresh sheets. None of it was meant for an invasion. "Adia," I said again, this time slower. "This is my home." In the background, I heard her laugh lightly to someone near her. "I helped her pick it out," she bragged, her voice drifting through the line. She never would have chosen this spot without me. I clenched the phone tighter. That wasn't true. She hadn't lifted a finger in this purchase. Yet even before stepping through the door, she was already taking credit. It was an old wound, reopened. Growing up, Adia always found a way to shine at my expense. When we were kids, she claimed she had taught me to read, even though it was our teacher who stayed late with me. At holidays, she told relatives she helped me cook dishes I had learned alone. She was the golden child, the eldest, the one our parents leaned toward. I was the youngest, the one who learned early that my best efforts would be rewritten as hers. Maya Angelou once said, "If someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time." Adia had shown me countless times. I just hadn't believed it enough to prepare for this. On the other end of the line, she was still chattering. "We'll bring some beach chairs, but you've got enough, right? And the big bedroom, we'll take that. You'll be fine in one of the smaller ones." My throat tightened, but I kept my voice calm. "I need time to settle in. This isn't a hotel." She laughed again, dismissive. "Don't be silly. It'll be fun. See you soon." The call ended. I stood there, listening to the silence after her voice, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and the ocean beyond the glass. For a moment, I felt the old pull, the instinct to cry, to pace, to crumble under the weight of being unseen. But I didn't. I had been erased too many times to let it happen again without a fight. I placed the phone down carefully, as though setting a fragile object onto stone. I inhaled deeply, letting the air fill my lungs. Panic would not serve me. Noise would not protect me. Only clarity would. "If she's coming with an army," I whispered to myself, "I need to be smarter, not louder." I walked through each room slowly, my fingers brushing the freshly painted walls, as if to remind myself, this space is mine, every inch. I paused at the counter where a notepad and pen sat, left there the night before when I was scribbling grocery lists. I picked up the pen, clicked it once, and set it down again. A small gesture, but one that carried weight. I thought of every space I had lost before, my husband's study, my son's basement, the kitchen I had tiptoed around as if my presence were a burden. Not again. This house was my boundary, my fence, my declaration that I was not invisible. Adia thought she was marching in to claim it. She thought my silence meant surrender. She had no idea I was already preparing my battlefield. By late morning, the piece I had wrapped around myself like a blanket was ripped away. From the front windows, I saw the first SUV roll down the gravel drive, tires grinding against stone. Behind it came another, then two more. Within minutes, my quiet road looked like a parking lot outside a stadium on game day. Doors slammed, voices carried, and the air shifted from ocean breeze to chaos. Children spilled out first, dragging coolers, towels, and inflatable toys, their sneakers pounding against the porch steps, as though the house had always belonged to them. A cousin I barely recognized looked around and shouted, "This place is perfect! Thanks for letting us use it!" Use it. The word stung. I hadn't said yes. More people crowded the lawn, laughing, hauling suitcases up the steps. My carefully swept porch became a luggage drop. Someone left a pizza box already half empty on my railing. The noise rattled the glass doors behind me. Only a few hours ago, I had been sipping coffee in silence. Now that silence was gone. I opened the door, forcing a smile that didn't touch my eyes. "Welcome," I said carefully, though my throat tightened on the word. Adia appeared then, wearing the broad grin of a woman who had just claimed victory. "Didn't I tell you this house was perfect? We'll make it lively. Family should never be quiet." Quiet had been exactly what I'd bought this house for. They stormed inside, spreading like water through cracks. A toddler's sticky hand pressed against my wall. Two teenagers argued over which bedroom had the better view. A man I didn't know opened my refrigerator, frowning. "Not much food. You'll need to stock up if this is going to work." "This isn't—" I started, but Adia cut me off. "Go ahead, pick your rooms," she called out, waving them upstairs. I stood frozen, watching them vanish up the stairwell with their bags. My rooms. My furniture. My carefully folded linens. Each step they took pressed against my chest like a weight. One aunt snagged the keys from the hook near the door. She jingled them playfully, locking and unlocking the door twice before sliding them into her purse. "Don't worry," she said when she noticed me staring. "I'll keep these safe." The key. A small piece of metal, but more than that, it was a boundary, the line between respect and trespass. And in one careless movement, she had crossed it. I whispered to myself, "The key isn't just a tool, it's ownership. And you just pocketed it like a trinket." But no one heard. No one cared. In the kitchen, a cousin tossed towels onto the counter. "We'll need these sorted out. Make sure there are enough for everyone." Another shouted from the living room, "Hey, can you move these chairs around? We'll need space for dinner later." It struck me then, I wasn't a homeowner in their eyes. I was being cast as the help, invisible, the one who should serve without complaint. Adia clapped her hands, commanding the room like a conductor. "Shoes off, people. Leave them by the door. Don't worry about the mess. She'll clean it up later." The laughter that followed pierced deeper than any insult. I clenched my jaw, repeating inside, "When they rewrite your role, they rewrite your worth." And here I was, being rewritten into a maid in my own home. I carried a stack of discarded flip-flops to the corner, each step deliberate, steady. My silence wasn't surrender. It was observation. Every careless word, every command, every dismissal, I filed it away. Respect is earned, honesty is appreciated, trust is gained, loyalty is returned, I thought bitterly, watching my family break all four in less than an hour. By early afternoon, the house looked nothing like mine. Suitcases blocked hallways, Voices bounced off the walls, and the air smelled of fast food wrappers and damp swimsuits. I moved to the doorway, leaning against the frame, studying the invasion. My heart raced, but my face remained still. Outside, I spotted Ione, my neighbor, walking her dog. She glanced up at the sight of cars crammed into my driveway, the porch overflowing with relatives. Our eyes met. She didn't say anything, but her sympathetic look said enough. Someone else saw what was happening. It steadied me. If silence is survival, I told myself, then planning is power. By the time they claimed every room, they didn't realize they had already awakened the one person they thought they could erase, me. By mid-afternoon, the house no longer felt like mine. Every corner was filled with voices, bags, shoes, and noise that seemed to eat away at the walls. I stepped outside to the back porch, closing the door quietly behind me, needing space to breathe. The ocean stretched in front of me, steady and indifferent, as though reminding me that some things remain unchanged no matter how chaotic people become. I sank into one of the chairs, listening to the muffled laughter spilling from inside. And then the memories came. It wasn't the first time Adia had swept into my space, declaring it hers. I could still see myself at 12, standing in a crowded school hallway while a teacher praised Adia for her intelligence. I had handed in a project too, one I'd worked on quietly, but my paper was set aside while hers was displayed for the class. "Be quiet," the teacher told me when I tried to explain. Later, at home, our parents decided which bedroom we would each get. "Adia's older," my mother had said. "She deserves the larger one." Then she turned to me with the same words that would follow me for years. "You don't mind, do you?" The refrain echoed now as I stared at the waves. "You don't mind, do you?" I whispered into the salt air. When people erase you long enough, you begin to wonder if you ever existed at all. William Faulkner once wrote, "The past is never dead. It's not even past." I understood that line in my bones, because here I was, decades later, sitting on my own porch, yet reliving the same scenes, the favoritism, the assumption that my voice was less. My house was proof I existed, and still, in an instant, it was being claimed by someone else. When I finally went back inside, I walked into a scene that felt like a cruel parody. Adia was in the living room, perched in the best chair as though it had been waiting for her. Around her, cousins and in-laws laughed. Someone handed her a drink. I hovered at the edge of the room, invisible in plain sight. "Adia always knows how to host," one cousin declared, raising her glass. "That's why she's married. You're still single, right?" Her eyes slid to me, then away, the jab delivered without hesitation. Heat rushed to my face, but I kept it steady. Inside, I thought, marriage isn't a prize, it's a choice, yet they speak as if my life is a failure because I chose differently, or because I was left behind. I wanted to shout, to correct them, to remind everyone that this was my house, not hers, and that hosting had never been my invitation. But my lips stayed pressed together. I would not give them the performance they wanted. Instead, I nodded once, a gesture so small it could be mistaken for agreement. My heart raced, but my silence was not weakness. It was strategy. Every word they spoke was another stone, and I was stacking them into a wall that would stand between us soon enough. The humiliation burned, but I swallowed it. I reminded myself, they may laugh now, but I will decide how this ends. The conversation continued, circling around Adia's stories, her supposed skill, her importance. Each laugh, each nod, carved a deeper mark in me. Yet, I forced myself to remain still, even as she looked my way with a smug smile, eyes glinting with victory. She thrived on spectacle. I thrived on preparation. I thought of an old saying, "Never wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it." If I snapped, they'd cheer. If I stayed quiet, I kept the upper hand. I will not be erased again, I vowed silently. Not in this house. So I busied myself with small, deliberate tasks, straightening a book on the shelf, folding a stray towel. Each action gave me cover, a way to watch without exploding. I was building a record, cataloging each insult, each theft, each careless remark. They thought I was retreating, but I was gathering ammunition. As the sun began to lower, orange lights spilling into the windows, the laughter only grew louder. It filled every room, bouncing through the walls until it seemed the house itself no longer remembered my presence. I stood in the hallway listening, a single voice drowned out by 22 others. The sound wrapped around me like chains, but I whispered to myself, the louder they get, the sharper my silence becomes. They thought my stillness was surrender. Soon they would learn it was the sound of sharpening steel. The next morning, I woke before dawn, hoping to catch a few moments of silence before the storm of voices started again. I padded into the kitchen barefoot, only to find the counters already cluttered with half-empty cereal boxes, sticky cups, and crumbs spread like confetti across the floor. The coffee pot gurgled, nearly empty, even though I hadn't touched it yet. Children were running up and down the hallway, their shouts bouncing against the walls, while adults called after them with no real intention of stopping the noise. One man complained loudly about the lack of cream for the coffee, another about the air conditioning being set too low. My kitchen sounded like a cafeteria, my hallways like a playground. I leaned against the counter and breathed out slowly. It's one thing to be a host, it's another to be erased in your own home. In this country, we're taught that owning a home means independence. It means control. But looking around, I felt stripped of both. At breakfast, I set down my mug of black coffee, only to hear a voice pierce through the din. "She's being selfish," a relative announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. Family means sharing everything. That's what family is about. The room went still for half a second, then filled with approving nods. Adia didn't say a word. She just smirked, letting the accusations fall from someone else's lips. Selfish. That was the word meant to corner me, to shame me into silence. My jaw tightened. These weren't suggestions. They were barbed accusations meant to strip me of my legitimacy as the owner. People who can't respect your boundaries will always call you selfish for having them, I thought, swallowing the bitterness that rose in my throat. One uncle leaned back in his chair. "Don't forget," he added, "family gave you everything you have. You wouldn't be here without us." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from responding. Really? I remembered every long night, every extra shift, every dollar I had stretched and saved to make this purchase. They had never paid a bill for me, not one. My silence only fueled them. Their voices grew stronger, emboldened by my quiet. And Adia watched me from across the table, eyes gleaming with satisfaction, as if she were orchestrating the entire performance. Later that morning, when the crowd thinned a little, my mother found me near the porch. She took my arm gently, her voice lowered as though she were offering comfort. "Don't make it awkward, honey," she whispered. "Let them stay. It's only a few weeks. Keep the peace." Her words cut deeper than the open insults had. I had expected her to be my shield, to remind them that I had earned this place, that my voice mattered. Instead, she was asking me to surrender again, for peace. I pulled away slightly, studying her face. "Peace?" I asked quietly. "Do you call this peace?" "They've turned my home into a circus," she sighed, the kind of sigh that said she was tired of my resistance. Sometimes keeping harmony is more important than being right. But harmony without justice isn't peace. It's oppression, dressed in quiet. I smiled faintly, not because I agreed, but because I realized then that if even my mother couldn't defend me, I had to defend myself. If I couldn't lean on her, I had to lean on my own resolve. The day dragged on, laughter and chatter filling every corner. Each time I tried to speak, my voice was drowned by another. Each instruction I gave was ignored, replaced by louder commands from Adia or one of her allies. I moved through the house like a ghost, watching, listening, cataloging every slight. And with each insult, each dismissal, my silence grew sharper. It wasn't submission, it was a blade, hidden for now, waiting for the right moment. By evening, I sat at the edge of the living room, unnoticed as they filled the house with their noise. I realized something crucial. They thought my silence meant I was beaten, but silence was only where my storm began. By the evening of the second day, I had endured more than I thought possible. The noise, the disrespect, the subtle and not-so-subtle reminders that in their eyes, my home was theirs to do with as they pleased. But there comes a moment when silence tastes like ash. I found myself in the kitchen, standing at the sink, when Adia walked in with a glass in her hand. My heart thumped once, steady but heavy. I turned, setting my palms on the counter, and spoke with deliberate calm. "This house is mine, Adia, and I need order here." She blinked at me, then smirked. "Order? Oh, come on. You're being dramatic. Family is family." "I am not your maid," I said firmly. "I won't tolerate damage to my home, not one more thing." She sipped her drink and laughed as if I'd told a joke. "Relax, they're enjoying themselves. You should be happy to have so much company. Most people would kill for this kind of family gathering." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "There's a difference between a gathering and an invasion. You crossed that line yesterday." From the living room, a cousin called out, "Adia, where's the wine opener?" As if I weren't standing right there, as if my words didn't matter at all. Adia leaned against the fridge, her grin widening. "See? They need me. Don't spoil it with your rules." Frustration flared in my chest. For a moment I wanted to shout, to slam my hand against the counter, but I forced my breath to steady. "This is my boundary," I told her, "and boundaries are not negotiable." Her only answer was a dismissive wave as she sauntered back into the crowd, her laughter mixing with theirs. My warning landed on deaf ears. Later, when I finally sat down at the edge of the dining room, hoping for some air, my brother Ziva appeared. He crouched beside me, his voice low. For a moment, I believed he had come to support me. "Don't make a scene," he murmured. "Just let them enjoy." "It's not worth the fight." I turned my head slowly, meeting his eyes. "Not worth the fight?" He shifted uncomfortably, looking away. "They're here for a short while. Don't ruin it. You've always been too rigid. Loosen up." His words hit harder than Adia's smirk. Betrayal is sharpest when it comes from the ones who should defend you. I swallowed, the ache sinking deeper. Inside my mind, I repeated Elie Wiesel's words I had once read. The opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And here was my brother, indifferent to the erosion of my dignity. I nodded slowly, though it was not agreement, but resignation. I realized then that I was alone in this fight. Yet that aloneness forged something inside me, steel, where once there had been fear. As the evening dragged on, the children grew wilder. A group of teenagers had found markers and thought it hilarious to scribble on the pale walls of my hallway. I heard the giggles first, then the squeak of marker tips on paint. I walked over, my voice sharp. "Stop that right now." They froze for a second, then burst into laughter again. One boy shrugged. "It's just a wall." Before I could respond, Adia appeared. She glanced at the scrawls, then at me. "Don't be ridiculous," she said, waving her hand as though dismissing smoke. "Walls can be painted over. No big deal." I stared at the bright lines bleeding into the paint I had chosen so carefully, small perhaps, but symbolic, a violation of the very space I had worked years to claim. If they can't respect the walls, I thought bitterly, how will they ever respect me? Americans understand this instinctively. Property isn't just wood and plaster, it's identity, sacrifice, independence. And yet, here in my house, it was nothing more than canvas for their carelessness. My patience thinned like glass under strain. The laughter, the insults, the casual theft of respect, it all burned into me, hotter than before. I said nothing, but inside I was blazing. When night fell, I retreated to the smallest guest room, closing the door behind me. On the desk sat a notepad. I pulled it closer, uncapping a pen, and began to write. Not a diary, not a list of grievances, but evidence. Each offense, each insult, each careless act, documented. "This isn't weakness," I whispered. "This is preparation." If they wouldn't listen to my words, they would listen to consequences. They mistook my quiet retreat as defeat. In truth, it was the moment I started building my case. On the third morning, I stepped onto the deck with my coffee, hoping for even 5 minutes of peace before the house erupted. Instead, I found half my family already gathered with beach towels slung over their shoulders, Adia directing them like a general. Someone shouted, "Time for a family picture before we head out!" Before I could move, a cousin pressed the camera into my hands. "You're better behind the camera anyway. You always were," she said with a laugh. I held it, stunned. "Don't you want me in the picture?" I asked. Adia glanced at me, her voice sharp with false sweetness. "This is about family. Don't make it about you. Just take the picture." I swallowed, lifting the camera as they huddled together, squeezing into the frame, arms thrown around each other. I snapped once, then again, my own reflection faint in the lens but nowhere in the moment. Hours later, scrolling online, I saw the photo already posted. They had cropped me out completely, leaving no trace of my hands that had steadied the camera, no trace of me at all. My chest tightened. You can be erased from a picture the same way you're erased from a family. Quietly, without protest. And worse, the world believes the image it's shown. I closed the phone with a snap and whispered to myself, "So this is how they want history written." Lunch should have been simple. I laid out fresh fruit, a loaf of bread, and a mug of hot coffee I had brewed for myself, a small meal after a draining morning. But before I could sit down, hands reached in. Grapes disappeared into Adia's palm. Someone tore off half the loaf of bread. A teenage nephew poured my coffee into his travel mug without asking. "Guess you're feeding us now, too," a cousin joked, crumbs already falling down his shirt. I stared at the empty plate that had been mine only a moment ago. The theft of food was small, yes, but it cut deep. In this country, meals are more than fuel. They are gestures of respect, tokens of hospitality. And here, even that symbol had been stripped from me. When people treat your kindness like a weakness, you stop serving the table. I pushed my chair back without a word. Adia smirked at me from across the counter. "Don't glare. It's just food. Lighten up." I didn't answer. Instead, I filed it away. Another tally on the growing list of offenses. The house swelled with laughter as they ate, the sound of chewing and chatter echoing against the walls. I sat off to the side, unnoticed, invisible again. The kitchen I had dreamed of cooking in for myself had become a battlefield, and I was already losing skirmishes. I listened, my silence heavy, while inside something shifted. Despair was hardening into something sharper. They thought I was too quiet to matter, but they forgot silence holds memory. Silence is a ledger that never loses count. That night, alone in my room, I opened my notepad. One by one, I wrote it all down. The stolen food, the photo that erased me, the scribbles on the wall, the laughter at my expense. The page filled quickly, each line proof that what I felt wasn't imagination, it was record. I looked at the folder tucked away in the drawer, legal papers crisp and waiting. They could cut me out of their pictures, but they could not cut me off the deed. "When they cut me from the picture," I whispered, "they didn't realize they were framing themselves for what was coming next." By the fourth afternoon, the noise inside the house had swelled to a pitch I couldn't stand. Relatives streamed in and out of rooms, cousins invited friends who hadn't even been on the original guest list, and coolers sat open on the porch as if the place were a beach bar. The line between visitor and squatter had blurred so badly that I barely recognized my own home anymore. I stood in the hallway, hands folded, listening to the racket, and thought, sometimes family doesn't knock, they break the door and call it love. What I had bought as a sanctuary was being paraded like a public resort. I stepped outside for air, only to see Adia on the deck with her phone lifted, her voice booming. "Welcome to our family's new beach house," she cheered, waving the camera as if she were hosting a real estate commercial. "Isn't it perfect?" Several neighbors had gathered at the edge of the lawn. They clapped politely, nodding as if what she said was gospel. "Beautiful place, Adia," one called. "You always had good taste." My lips pressed into a thin line. Inside, the words boiled. She didn't buy one brick of it. She didn't earn a dime of it. But I said nothing. My silence wasn't surrender. It was a blade I kept sharpening. She spun the phone back toward the crowd inside, capturing them cheering and shouting, "Family forever!" I remained at the edge, erased even as I stood on the porch of my own home. Possession, they say, is 9/10 of the law, but only when the truth stays silent. Dinner that night turned into something worse. The dining table sagged under the weight of plates and voices. Adia raised her glass, smiling slyly, and said loud enough for the entire room. She couldn't afford this place without Dad's inheritance. Let's not forget, this house is a family legacy. The chatter quieted for a heartbeat, then relatives nodded, murmuring in agreement. One leaned forward, smirking at me. So really, this house is all of ours in a way? I gripped my fork so tightly the metal bent. My mind flashed back to years of working late into the night, clipping coupons, paying off debts while others took vacations. Every check I deposited had been a step toward this house. And now, in one sentence, she had stripped me of that truth. I wanted to scream, to slam my fist against the table, but instead, I stared at her calmly. Inside, the storm raged. No, it was never yours, and it never will be. The humiliation was sharp. To be diminished in front of relatives was one thing. To have it said in front of neighbors was another. In American culture, ownership isn't just pride, it's survival. And they had spit on that survival, turning my sacrifice into a cheap family anecdote. I rose quietly from my chair, setting the bent fork on my plate. "Excuse me," I murmured. Adia gave me a triumphant look, as if she thought I was retreating. But I wasn't. Behind my calm face, something had crystallized. They believed their lies would stand forever, that repetition would make them true. But paper and ink don't lie. I walked down the hallway toward my room, where the folder sat hidden in my drawer. Every laugh, every insult, every claim they'd made, it had pushed me to this point. They thought their words made them stronger, but every word they spoke only tightened the noose they didn't know was waiting. By the fifth evening, the walls of my house felt tighter than they had ever been. The laughter, the stomping feet, the constant voices, all of it pressed down until the air itself felt stolen. I walked upstairs, hoping for a moment in the only space that still felt like mine, the master bedroom. But when I pushed open the door, Adia was already there, dragging a suitcase across the carpet. She didn't flinch when she saw me. Instead, she turned, her smile sharp. "You're single. You don't need the best room. The couples deserve it more." I stood rooted to the spot. "This is my house, Adia. My room." She shrugged, tossing clothes onto the bed I had made. "You'll be fine on the couch. You always adapt. You've been adapting your whole life." The sting in her words wasn't just eviction, it was reduction. She had turned me into a guest in my own home. I clenched my fists, but kept my voice even. "It's one thing to be overlooked," I said quietly, "but it's another to be evicted from your own space." Her only answer was a laugh that echoed down the hallway. That night, I sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the ceiling while their voices carried above me. For years, I had chosen silence as my shield, but lying there on the hard cushion, I realized silence had reached its limit. Malcolm X's words came back to me. "If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything." I sat up, my breath steadying, my mind clearing. I was done falling. I was done being invisible. Dinner was loud, messy, a chorus of chatter and clinking silverware. I waited until plates were half full, until every voice overlapped another. Then I stood, my chair scraping across the floor. All eyes turned toward me. I carried a folder in my hands, thick and heavy. Without a word, I dropped it onto the table. The thud cut through the room. "This isn't your house," I said, my voice calm, even. I opened the folder, spreading out deed papers, copies of purchase agreements, and, at the top, a recording of Adia's call. Her voice filled the room. "We'll be there in 3 hours with 22 people. Make sure you're ready." Gasps echoed. Forks clattered onto plates. "This," I continued, tapping the papers, "is mine. Every dollar, every hour, every sacrifice, mine. And here's proof." For a moment, silence hung, heavy and shocked. Then Adia's face twisted. "You wouldn't dare turn against your family," she hissed. I leaned closer, my words cutting sharp. "Family doesn't mean free rent. Family doesn't mean theft." Around the table, eyes dropped. A cousin muttered, "Well, she's right." Another shifted uncomfortably, refusing to meet my gaze. Adia slammed her palm on the table. You're unbelievable, after all we've done for you. I cut her off. What you've done is rewrite my sacrifices as your inheritance. But paper doesn't lie, Adia. This house isn't a legacy you can claim. It's a home I built. The chaos of their laughter had collapsed into silence. Papers lay scattered across spilled drinks and crumpled napkins, my evidence stark against their disorder. And in that moment, something shifted. I felt taller, stronger. Not because they had finally respected me, but because I had respected myself. They would resist, I knew. Adia would not surrender quietly. But the tide had turned. They thought I was the servant of this house. That night, I became its master again. The morning after I laid my evidence on the dinner table, the house was different. Not quieter in the comforting way I had once imagined, but heavy, weighted with shame, tension, and silence that pressed against the walls. For the first time in days, there was no clatter of laughter spilling from the kitchen. The sound of 22 voices had thinned to hushed whispers behind closed doors. I walked down the hall, hearing fragments. "What do we do now?" one whispered. Another answered, "Just keep your head down." It was almost amusing. They had filled every corner with their noise, and now the truth had stilled them in ways anger never could. I poured coffee into a clean mug and thought, truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just sits in the room until no one can ignore it. Vindication mixed with lingering anger in my chest. Seniors know this feeling. The shift that comes when denial collapses, when those who once seemed so bold cannot meet your eyes. That morning they couldn't. As I sat at the table, the memory replayed, the moment I had dropped the folder like a hammer. The sharp slap of paper against wood silenced the room in a way no shouting ever had. "This is not an Airbnb," I had said calmly, my voice clear over the clinking silverware that had suddenly stopped. "This is my home." I remembered the stammer from one of my cousins. "She can't be serious." And then Ione's voice, steady as stone. "She has every right. This is her property." The shame that had rippled through the crowd was stronger than any punishment I could have imagined. Aldous Huxley once wrote, "Facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored." I felt the truth of that now. They could try to rewrite history, claim my sacrifices as theirs, but the papers didn't lie. Still, beneath my calm, there was a sting. That they had gone so far, so willingly, to deny what was plainly mine. It was a scar even evidence couldn't erase. After breakfast, I stood once more at the head of the table. "I have one more thing to share," I said, my hand steady as I placed my phone on the wood. With a press of a button, Adia's voice filled the room. "We'll be there in 3 hours, with 22 people. Get it ready." The gasps came immediately. No one could deny it. Proof undeniable. "This," I said evenly, "is the truth you tried to bury. But the tape remembers." Adia's face twisted, her eyes narrowing as though she'd been burned. "You betrayed me," she snapped, slamming her fist against the table. I leaned forward, my eyes fixed on hers. "No, Adia, you betrayed yourself. You used my kindness and twisted it into entitlement. You turned my home into your playground. The only betrayal here is yours." Relatives looked from her to me, their expressions torn between disbelief and shame. The room pulsed with shock. Some shook their heads, others muttered under their breath. The balance had shifted. For the first time, I saw cracks appear, not in me, but in them. An uncle whispered sharply to his wife, "We should have known better." A cousin hissed, "I told you she'd never let this stand." It was no longer me against them, it was them against each other. Some wanted to defend Adia, clinging to her authority. Others wanted distance, embarrassed to be caught in her lie. I sat back, my hands folded, watching with detachment. "It's funny," I said softly. "For days, you drowned me out, but now you can't even agree with one another." The murmurs grew louder, arguments breaking out across the table. One cousin stood abruptly. "We should just leave. This isn't worth it." Another snapped back. "No, we're staying. She owes us." I cut in, my voice calm, slicing through their squabble. "I don't owe you anything. Not a bed, not a meal, not even this conversation. You came here under false pretenses, and now you're facing the truth. The silence returned, thicker than before. The house was still full, but for the first time, I felt like the walls were listening to me again. The morning light filtered through the blinds, but the air inside the house was thick, as if it carried the residue of last night's confrontation. I walked down the hallway slowly, listening to the shuffle of bags being dragged across the floorboards. Suitcases lined the walls, half-zipped and waiting. The relatives who once stormed my kitchen and bedrooms with such arrogance now whispered to one another in corners, voices low, careful, as though afraid to be overheard. Their eyes avoided mine. Some glanced at me quickly and then dropped their gaze to the floor. The night before had stripped away their bravado, but not their resentment. I could see it in the way they moved, tense and stiff, like children caught red-handed, yet still unwilling to admit their guilt. I stood in the middle of the living room, watching, and thought, when people fear consequences, their voices shrink. It was true. For days they had shouted over me, laughed at me, erased me. Now the truth had silenced them more effectively than anything else I could have done. I felt calm, colder than I expected, but ready for the next step. By noon, I called everyone to the dining table. The same table where chaos had reigned was now cleared, the mess swept away, replaced by a stack of papers and pens. My folder sat open, its contents fanned neatly across the wood. "Sit," I instructed. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. One by one, they obeyed, filling the chairs with reluctant movements. "These," I said, tapping the documents, "are occupancy agreements. From now on, you sign acknowledging that you are guests, guests with limits, guests who pay or guests who leave." The murmurs began immediately. A cousin scoffed. "This is insane." "Sign," I replied evenly, "or pack. Those are the only options." Adia's lips curled into a sneer. "You're really going to treat your family like strangers? Contracts? Rules?" I met her gaze without flinching. "Family doesn't mean lawlessness. You came uninvited. You stayed without respect. If you want to remain, it will be on paper." One cousin reluctantly reached for the pen. His hand shook slightly as he scribbled his name, then dropped the pen onto the table with a sharp cack. The sound rang through the silence heavier than any shouting could have. That sound was compliance. That sound was acknowledgement. Others followed, some muttering, some glaring, but one by one, the signatures appeared. "Accountability feels like punishment," I said softly, "only to those who refuse responsibility." The words hung, unchallenged, but tension boiled over when the argument spilled onto the porch. Adia stormed outside, her followers behind her, and her voice carried into the street. "She can't do this! We own this house too! It's ours!" The neighbors had gathered by then, curious after nights of noise and cars crowding the driveway. Ione, steady as always, stepped forward, her voice firm. "No, Adia. Everyone here knows this deed is hers. This house belongs to her alone." Murmurs rippled through the crowd of onlookers. The humiliation landed like a slap. Adia's face flushed crimson, her bravado stripped away not by me, but by the community she had tried to impress. I stood at the doorway, arms crossed, watching. Public exposure was sharper than private confrontation, and I knew the sting of it would linger. In American neighborhoods, reputation is currency. You can shout inside your own walls, but once the neighbors hear the truth, there's no reclaiming the image you tried to project. Adia sputtered, her words stumbling. She manipulated this." "No," I interrupted quietly. "I just stopped letting you manipulate me." The porch fell silent, the authority shifting once and for all. By afternoon, bags were being shoved into trunks, car doors slammed, and voices muttered curses under their breath. Some left without a word, others stomped past me, but none looked me in the eye. Adia lingered the longest, glaring at me as though her stare alone could undo the humiliation. But there was nothing she could do. Her empire of lies had collapsed. Inside, I whispered to myself, "They came with arrogance. They leave with shame. They thought the world would side with them. Instead, the world watched them walk away in disgrace." The day after their departure, I woke to a silence that felt almost unreal. For a week, the house had been filled with constant noise, footsteps, arguments, doors slamming, laughter that grated instead of comforted. Now, all that remained were traces of their presence. I walked through the hallway and saw crumpled sheets abandoned on the beds, crumbs scattered across counters, cushions overturned as if the furniture had fought a battle of its own. It struck me then that chaos lingers even when the people causing it are gone. But the air itself felt lighter. I poured myself a cup of coffee, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, and thought, sometimes you don't realize how heavy a burden is until you set it down. I let out a breath I hadn't noticed I was holding. Seniors often talk about the peace that comes when you finally close a door on toxic influences. That morning, I tasted that peace, even though it was tinged with a hint of loneliness. By mid-morning, I had made a decision. I drove into town, bought new locks, and came home to change them myself. The click of each new bolt sliding into place was like reclaiming parts of myself. This wasn't just about safety. It was about boundaries, drawn firm and final. They called me selfish, I whispered to the empty air as I tested the new lock. But selfishness doesn't build a home. Discipline does. Later, while cleaning, I found a folded note left on the counter. The handwriting was unmistakable. Adia's. It said, "You made this ugly." I read it twice, feeling an old sadness tug at me, but instead of anger, relief washed over me. I no longer needed her validation. Her words couldn't stain the walls of my home. I set the note in the trash, whispering, "It is not my job to keep peace by sacrificing myself." In the following days, the fallout arrived. My phone buzzed with short, curt texts from cousins. "We'll talk when you calm down." Others didn't write at all, their silence a new kind of rejection. Then Ziva, my brother, called. His voice was hesitant, wrapped in excuses. "You know how Adia is," he said. "She gets carried away. Don't take it too personally." I held the phone against my ear, my jaw tightening. Inside I thought, excuses are just masks for complicity. But out loud I only said, "I hear you." Because sometimes saying less is saying enough. So many families minimize bad behavior, smoothing it over so they don't have to confront the truth. I remembered a line I once read, "You teach people how to treat you by what you allow," and I had allowed too much, for too long. That chapter was closed. The grief was real. I had cut ties that had been part of me for a lifetime. But peace, even bittersweet, is better than being erased in your own home. That evening, I lit a candle and walked through the rooms slowly, one by one. I set cushions upright, folded blankets neatly, scrubbed away the last traces of sticky fingerprints. By the time I was done, the house didn't feel hollow. It felt alive again, not because of noise, but because of respect. I sat with a fresh cup of coffee, facing the ocean through the wide glass doors. The waves rolled in steady, unbothered, as though reminding me that life keeps moving, no matter the battles behind us. I reflected quietly. Sometimes you save your life by saving your space. No fireworks marked this moment, no applause, no recognition from the outside world. Just a quiet strength, a steady breath, and the understanding that cutting ties doesn't mean loss, it means rebirth. They thought leaving would break me, but in their absence, I finally found the space to breathe. A week had passed since the last car left my driveway, but the silence still startled me. Not the suffocating kind that follows an argument, but a healing one, the sort of quiet that allows you to hear your own breath again. Each morning, I walked through the house and found new reminders of the storm that had come and gone. The walls still bore faint traces where the teenagers had scribbled, though I had painted over them. Broken picture frames and chipped dishes sat in a pile near the trash, casualties of carelessness. I had hired a cleaning crew to help restore order, and together we scrubbed, swept, and repaired. The house slowly shed the stench of noise and disrespect, becoming once more a sanctuary. I paused often, breathing in the faint lemon scent of polished wood and the clean air drifting in through open windows. "The best revenge," Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "is not to be like your enemy." Those words carried me through the week. It wasn't about gloating or dragging them back to witness my triumph. It was about reclaiming my space with dignity intact, Seniors know this truth well. The sweetest victories are quiet ones. I was sorting receipts at my desk when the email arrived. The sender's name made my breath hitch for half a second. Adia. I opened it slowly, already knowing it would not be an olive branch. The words were short, cold, designed to pierce. You made this ugly. I sat back in my chair, staring at the sentence. Once upon a time, those words might have undone me, sent me spiraling into self-doubt. But now, I smiled faintly. They were proof she had lost control. When people can't win with lies, they resort to bitterness. I placed my fingers on the keys and typed a single reply. No, I made it mine. I pressed send and felt a weight lift. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was absolute. Closure, written in 5 words. She thought this was about ugliness, I whispered to myself. It was about survival. One day later, I sat across from my lawyer in town. The folder was on the desk between us, the same folder I had once dropped like a weapon at my dinner table. I want to update the deed, I told him. He raised an eyebrow. Update how? No inheritance, I said, without demonstrated respect. If they want to claim blood ties someday, they'll need to show proof of honor first. He leaned back in his chair, impressed. You've just built a wall no one can climb without earning it. That was the point, I replied. It wasn't vengeance, it was structure. It was foresight. In America, respect isn't inherited, it's earned. And now my home, my legacy, was safeguarded from anyone who mistook entitlement for love. By the end of that week, the house was whole again. On a warm evening, I carried a mug of coffee to the porch and settled into the chair that faced the ocean. The sky was streaked with orange and violet, the kind of sunset that made you believe in new beginnings. The battle had never been just about walls and deeds. It was about my worth, about drawing a final line no one could cross without consequence. I thought of another truth I had learned too late in life. Respect yourself enough to walk away from anything that no longer serves you, grows you, or makes you happy. Cutting ties had cost me family, but it gave me back myself. I sat there long after the sun dipped below the horizon, the waves rolling steady, my heart finally quiet. They had left with shame. I had stayed with everything that mattered, my home, my peace, and my power.